Billionaire CEO begged, "If you heal her voice, I'll give everything."
My daughter hasn't moved in
But a
6
single
months.
dad stepped in. The
Doctors
cold
say there's nothing
fluorescent
more they
light
can do.
streaked pale across the glass
I've spent
walls.
everything, every last hope.
Inside, the entire media empire seemed to hold its breath. Elizabeth Hart, the most powerful CEO in the city, stood frozen mascara
You've got
running
the wrong
like black
person, I
rain
can't
down her
help you.
face. On the other side of the glass, a man pushing a mop cart stopped. Mike lifted his head. Their eyes met power and invisibility colliding. Elizabeth swallowed hard, her trembling hand reaching out as if grasping for something in the middle of a storm. "Please." Her voice broke apart. "If you can help my daughter speak again, I'll give you everything." A bolt of lightning split the sky. The camera pushes slowly into Mike's eyes, not fear, but an old secret stirring back to life. In the corner, a 6-year-old girl clutched a sketch of stick figures with shaky letters scrawled across the page, "Dr. Mike." The piano faltered. Mike let go of the broom handle. "It's not money," he whispered. "It's the truth." Rain hammered the glass harder, and the story began. The 47th floor hallway of Hart Media late at night was nearly empty. Only the distant murmur of the city filtered through the towering panes, blending with the sterile hum of fluorescent light that laid a mist over everything. In the leather chair tucked in the corner, a little girl sat quietly, her legs dangling far from the floor. Grace, 6 years old, clutched a worn sketchbook. Her tiny hand moved a pencil carefully across the page, drawing stick figures over and over. Every picture was the same, a gentle-eyed man and a small girl standing beside him. Adults walked past her without pausing. Overworked employees, her mother's associates, no one saw more than a silent child. But for Grace, each pencil line was a secret conversation, her only weapon against the silence that had swallowed her for 8 long months. Just a few steps away, a man pushed his cleaning cart in silence. His dark blue uniform bore faded water stains, his calloused hands guiding the mop across the shining floor. Mike Thompson, the night janitor. For 3 years, he had moved through these halls like a shadow. No one remembered his name. No one looked twice. He chose invisibility, like armor, a way to hide from the ruins of his career and his life. But tonight, as Mike bent to collect trash near the glass door, his gaze collided with Grace's wide, dark eyes. Through the clear pane, her look was not simple curiosity. It was deeper. It pressed against something buried in his chest, a wound he thought long dead. His hand tightened around the broom handle. Grace did not blink. On the page before her, she had just finished another stick figure. The man's soft eyes, identical to the one staring back at her now. And in the corner, in clumsy letters, "Dr. Mike." The hallway lights flickered, conspiring with the strange connection. A child trapped in silence, and a man hidden by choice, suddenly tethered by an invisible thread. In that silence, the audience feels it clearly. Something is about to change. The night was not yet over, but the fates of 3 people, Elizabeth, Grace, and Mike, had already begun to turn. A mother teetering on the edge of despair, a child aching for release, and a janitor carrying a secret he could no longer bury. They would soon collide in a single desperate plea. "If you can heal her voice, I'll give you everything." Before we begin, take a moment to comment your city. Where are you watching from today? And once the story is over, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. Chapter 1. The Mother Collapses Night. had fallen deep. Manhattan lay under a fine, relentless drizzle, raindrops tapping against the 47th floor glass like a cruel, steady metronome. Inside the vast office, cold, fluorescent light washed across the polished wood desk, scattering over files strewn across the floor. Some pages were stained, their ink blurred, where dark streaks of mascara had fallen from the face of a woman both proud and undone. Elizabeth Hart, CEO of Hart Media, one of the most powerful women in the city, sat collapsed on the floor, her back pressed against the desk leg, a cell phone clutched desperately to her ear. Her voice was raw, ragged, breaking between shallow breaths. Please, please, Dr. Simon, I'll pay triple. I don't care what it costs. Just can you help my daughter? On the other end came a weary male voice, heavy with polite refusal. Mrs. Hart, I'm sorry. Selective mutism this severe takes time, not money. I can't take the case on such short notice. Elizabeth's knuckles whitened as she gripped the phone. A tear slid down, dissolving what was left of her makeup. When the line went dead, silence crashed over her like an unfinished storm. In the leather chair by the window, her 6-year-old daughter sat curled into herself, a shadow within the glow. Grace's dark hair fell across half her face. On her lap lay an open sketchbook, her tiny hands moving a pencil over paper with trembling care. Once again, she drew the same image, a gentle-eyed man standing beside a small girl. No laughter, no whispers, only the scratch of graphite filling the void where her voice should have been. Elizabeth looked over, her heart clenching. She had swayed governments, devoured rival networks with a nod. But before her own child, she was as powerless as a lost child herself. The phone rang again. Elizabeth snatched it up, her voice cracking. Dr. Lee. Yes, it's me again. My daughter Grace. She hasn't spoken in 8 months. Tomorrow, there's a custody evaluation. If she doesn't speak, they'll take her away from me. Please, I beg you. A long pause, then the answer dry and merciless. I'm afraid there's nothing I can do overnight, Mrs. Hart. Trauma doesn't obey deadlines. The phone slipped from her hand, clattering against the floor like a cruel gavel. Elizabeth bent forward, clutching her head, her golden hair tumbling in tangled strands to cover her face. Her shoulders shook, her muffled sobs blending with the relentless tapping of rain on glass. Out in the hallway, Mike Thompson stopped before the transparent door. His hands tightened around the mop handle as he gazed inside. The woman the press called the Iron Queen of Media now sat folded in on herself, hollow as an abandoned soul. Mike had witnessed her hidden tears before, but never a collapse this raw, this stripped of armor. Quietly, he moved his mop again, pretending to be a shadow. But his heartbeat stumbled uneven. From the chair, Grace suddenly lifted her gaze. Her dark eyes locked on his through the glass, long, unblinking. Mike froze, his hand trembling at the handle. She wasn't looking at her mother, not the fallen phone, only at him, as though in this invisible man she saw a way out. Elizabeth noticed. She followed her daughter's gaze and found it fixed on the janitor. In that instant, the horror sank and her daughter seemed calmer, looking at a stranger with a mop than sitting by her own mother's side. A sob broke loose. Elizabeth staggered up, stepping on scattered files as she rushed toward the glass. Please. The word trembled from her lips, uncertain who she was begging. Her child, the world, or the man in the shadows. Mike dropped his head, feigning focus on the floor, though his chest thundered. He knew this moment was a line that once crossed could never be erased. The powerful woman wasn't calling lawyers, wasn't calling doctors. Her desperate eyes had fallen on him. The night dragged on, closing chapter 1 with an unforgettable tableau. An office blazing against the ocean of darkness, papers strewn like fallen snow. A powerful CEO crumpled on the floor, trembling in helplessness. A silent child sketching the same gentle figure again and again. And outside the glass, the invisible man, the only one both their eyes sought. And in that moment, the audience knows the Iron Queen has fallen. But from this collapse, the true story is only beginning. Chapter 2. The Eyes Through the Glass. The 47th floor hallway was so silent that each step Mike Thompson took echoed like a hollow drumbeat on the tiles. Fluorescent light stretched in long strips overhead, casting its cold blue tint across the space, flattening everything into lifeless shapes. The wheels of his cart squeaked faintly, trailing the sharp tang of cleaning solution, weaving into the stale scent of old coffee and paper. Mike knew that smell well. For 3 years, it had been his only proof of existence, a faint signature that said he was here, even if no one ever saw him. He moved his mop across pane after pane of gleaming glass, slow and steady, like a man keeping his own breath in rhythm. To most people, he was nothing more than a shadow part of the furniture. And Mike preferred it that way. To be unseen was to be safe. But tonight, he realized he was invisible no longer. Through the clear glass wall of the CEO's office, Grace Hart's dark, unblinking eyes followed his every movement. The little girl sat curled on the leather chair, her sketchbook open across her lap. The pencil in her hand had stopped mid-stroke, leaving her stick figures unfinished. Instead, her gaze clung to Mike as if he were the last living thing in her world. A tightness gripped his chest. He bent quickly, scrubbing at the floor with sudden focus, as though some invisible stain demanded urgent attention. But his heart beat faster, because he knew he had become the center of a child's silent universe. He risked a glance upward, and in that brief moment, their eyes met. No words, no gestures, just the collision of silence so deep it made his hands tremble. Grace didn't blink. In her black pupils flickered a strange recognition. Not the curiosity of a child, but the look of a soul that had endured too long in silence and had just found a way out. Mike swallowed hard. Half of him wanted to flee, to push the cart down the corridor and vanish through the fire exit. The other half begged him to stay still, to let that gaze pierce through the armor he'd worn for 3 years. Inside the office, Elizabeth still hunched over her phone, dialing another number, her voice breaking in hopeless pleas. But Grace didn't care. That chaos was shut away. She looked only outward at the man with the mop. And in that instant, Mike understood in her eyes he wasn't just a janitor anymore. He was someone she had drawn again and again in those trembling stick figures. Someone she trusted more than the expensive therapists who passed through her mother's doors. A chill ran down his spine. He gripped the mop handle until his knuckles blanched. In the cavernous hush of the hallway, his pounding heartbeat seemed the only sound left. Grace tilted her head as if to make sure he was still there. Then a flicker of a smile brushed her lips. So faint, Mike thought he imagined it. But no, it was real. The first smile he had ever seen on the face of a child buried in silence. And in that fragile moment, Mike knew a crack had formed in the wall between them. Small, but enough to let the light seep through. He stood frozen, pretending to move the mop, his eyes never leaving hers. And when Grace finally looked down, placing her pencil to paper again, Mike caught a glimpse of what she wrote. Scrawled across the page, clumsy but unmistakable Dr. Mike. His heart clenched, memories surged, rushing over him like a flood. He staggered back, turning quickly away. But deep down, he knew nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 3. The offer to trade. Everything over Manhattan. A storm had broken loose. Lightning split across the sky, its glare flashing through the reinforced glass of the 47th floor. For a heartbeat, the CEO's office blazed white, then fell back into thick shadow, the wind howling as if the city itself was mourning. Elizabeth Hart stood braced against her desk, trembling hands clutching the polished edge of wood. Papers littered the floor, some caught in the draft beneath the door, fluttering like silver moths. Her eyes were rimmed red, but burned with a desperate resolve. Beside her, little Grace sat quietly, pencil scratching another stick figure onto the page, as if the storm outside had no place in her small, silent world. Down the hall, Mike was finishing the last row of desks when the glass door opened. The sharp clack of high heels echoed across the floor as Elizabeth strode toward him. For the first time in 3 years, the queen of a media empire looked directly at the building's invisible man. Her gaze was not the cold command of a boss, nor the casual indifference of the powerful. It was the gaze of a mother driven to the edge. You... Her voice cracked hoarse with exhaustion. You've been here all along, haven't you? 3 years. Always here. And she. Elizabeth turned, staring at her daughter, then drew a shuddering breath, swallowing pride like bitter ash. She notices you. Grace watches you when you pass. She looks at you, as if you're the only one left in her world. Mike froze, the sharp scent of disinfectant still clinging to his hands. His heart pounded, because he knew exactly where this conversation was heading, toward the place he had avoided at all costs. Elizabeth stepped closer, her shoulders shaking, her voice breaking into sobs. If you can heal her voice, I'll give you everything. Money, a new life, security, anything. I don't care what it takes. I'll give you my world, if only my daughter can speak again. Thunder cracked, shaking the glass. Lightning poured into the room, lighting Elizabeth's tear-streaked face in stark relief. The sight forced Mike to turn away. This woman who once commanded Wall Street, who bent governments with her deals, now stood pleading not as a titan, but as a mother. Quietly, almost too faint to hear, Mike whispered, "Mrs. Hart." "I'm not a therapist." Her head snapped up, desperation blazing in her eyes. "I don't care what you are. I care about what you might be able to do." Silence stretched thick as the storm pressing against the glass. Wind rattled the windows. Mike's mop toppled and clattered across the tiles. In the corner, Grace lifted her head, her still heavy eyes fixed on them, witnessing, as though she understood, a covenant was being written in that very moment. The walls Mike had built around himself for 3 long years began to crack. Elizabeth's words weren't a bargain. They were a cry ripped from the marrow of motherhood, louder than money, stronger than pride. He stood at a crossroad to keep hiding or to step into the whirlpool of a past that had once destroyed him. A sudden flash of lightning lit up the sketchbook in Grace's lap. Across the page, in crooked letters, the words stood clear: Dr. Mike. Mike shut his eyes. His life was about to change. Amid the trembling storm, Elizabeth stood before him, her hand trembling as she reached out, not as a CEO issuing commands, but as a mother pleading for her child. And in that moment, the truth was undeniable: power, wealth, and status meant nothing in the face of a little girl's lost voice. Chapter 4: The Buried Files. The Manhattan storm had passed, but its damp breath lingered in the night air. Far away in Queens, the clock on the wall of a tired apartment lobby ticked toward 3 in the morning. Mike Thompson shut the warped wooden door behind him, sliding the lock twice out of habit. Beyond, car horns moaned in the distance, mixing with the drip-drip of rain still falling from the tin roof. His apartment sat on the 3rd floor. 1 bedroom, a living room that doubled as a kitchen. 4 yellowed walls, paint peeling from age. The ceiling bulb flickered, spreading a weak amber haze over secondhand furniture bought from flea markets. On the table, an old radio and a stack of instant noodles. Everything about the place whispered of escape, temporary, soulless, leaving no trace behind. He hung his wet jacket on a chair, slipped off soaked shoes by the door, and collapsed onto the edge of the bed. Both hands covered his face as he drew in a long breath. Elizabeth's plea echoed in his mind. "If you can heal her voice, I'll give you everything." His body trembled, not from cold, but from memories breaking loose. Grace. That child wasn't just the daughter of a powerful CEO. She was a fragment of the life he had buried. Her eyes through the glass, her shaky scrawl of Dr. Mike, those shards pierced straight through the armor he had built these past 3 years. In the corner of the bedroom against the wall sat a low wooden cabinet. Beneath a pile of old blankets and dusty books lay a cardboard box, its edges frayed, the brown paper peeling. Mike's gaze fixed there. He rose slowly, pulling the box into the light. Its scrape against the floor was a harsh whisper in the stillness. He hadn't touched it in over a year. Every glimpse of it stabbed him, so he had shoved it deep out of sight as though hiding a grave. But tonight, hiding was no longer possible. He set it on the table. His breath came uneven. Fingers peeled away brittle tape, and the lid gave way easily as if eager to spill its secrets. Inside, painful order. A framed doctorate in child psychology glass cracked at the corner. A revoked license stamped in angry red: revoked. Faded newspaper clippings. Prominent child psychologist under fire. Allegations destroy career overnight. Mike lifted one yellowed page. Ink stung his nose. There he was, 3 years younger. Tailored suit, confident smile. Once praised as the man who could hear the heart of a child. And then in a single afternoon, it had all collapsed. The paper slipped from his hand. His fingers shook. At the bottom of the box lay a blue folder, edges curled with time. Printed bold across the cover, Grace Elizabeth Hart Morrison. The sight blurred his vision. He brushed the cover with trembling fingers as though stroking an old wound. His chest tightened. This was the piece of his past he had sworn never to face again. He opened it. The first pages carried notes in his own steady handwriting. Female patient, age 3. Parents divorced. Signs of separation anxiety. Memory rushed back the first session. Grace in a blue polka dot dress, clutching her teddy bear. Wide black eyes, cautious but steady. Mike had knelt on the floor, meeting her gaze level. Grace, he had asked softly, "Would you like to draw how you feel today?" She nodded. Her pencil sketched a house split by a jagged line, father on one side, mother on the other, and a small girl stranded in between. That day, Mike realized this child doesn't need stiff conversation. She needs a safe way to pour out fear in pictures. He was right. Within months, progress bloomed. Grace laughed. Moore spoke words for feelings instead of hiding behind drawings. His notes read, "Patient showing excellent progress. Sessions may be reduced. Rereading those lines now, pride stabbed like a blade." Because he knew how the file ended. The last pages were empty. No sessions after that day. The day Richard Morrison appeared bringing shadows and accusations that shattered Mike's career. He closed the folder, standing rigid, his shadow stretching long across the bare floor. Elizabeth's face returned in his mind, her trembling hands, her pride in ruins. Then Grace, her silent eyes through the glass, her sketches of the gentle-eyed man. His heart thundered against the silence. A question rose like thunder inside him. Could I go back to being a doctor? Back to being Dr. Mike in a child's memory. But with it would come truth-exposed storms of media wounds reopened. Mike sank onto the chair, head in his hands. His throat locked around a scream. The old radio crackled faintly, as if whispering from another life. He reopened the folder. The first drawing Grace had ever made lay at the front, a man with kind eyes beside a small girl. His tears broke free, falling onto the page, bleeding into the pencil lines. For 3 years, he had run from himself. But one child had pulled him back without a word, only a gaze. Outside, dawn crept in. Faint streaks of pink cut through the dust-streaked window, laying a soft light across the table. The folder glowed faintly in that light, as if refusing to remain hidden. Mike sat upright, inhaling deep. In that moment, he knew his life had turned. The child still called him Dr. Mike, and he could no longer live as a shadow. Mike shut the folder and held it tight against his chest. In that shabby Queens apartment, his eyes were red, but dawn glimmered at their corners. The invisible janitor's mask had slipped, revealing a fallen doctor, broken by scandal. Yet in Grace's eyes, he was still the one who once listened, once protected. And the audience understands this secret will change everything. Chapter 5. The Little Girl Disappears. By morning, Hart Media was no longer a tower of glass rising proud above Manhattan. It had become a hive in chaos. Police cars lined the entrance, red and blue lights pulsing across the mirrored facade. Inside the lobby, employees scattered in panic phones rang endlessly, and reporters swarmed the street. The news had spread faster than last night's storm. Elizabeth Hart's daughter was missing. At the center of it all stood Elizabeth, still in last night's suit, hair-tangled eyes, ringed with exhaustion. Her hand trembled, but her voice fought to hold steady. "Find her. Do you hear me? Find my daughter." From the back of the crowd, Mike hovered in the shadows, careful to keep his distance. His eyes followed Elizabeth's every movement. She was no longer the icy CEO. She was simply a mother shattered, clinging to the only thing she had left. On the 47th floor, the boardroom had turned into a command center. Giant screens streamed feeds from the building's cameras, every corner of the tower under scrutiny. A gray-haired detective with calm, steady eyes introduced himself as Detective Harris. Leaning toward the monitors, his low voice carried across the room. Footage shows she left through the parking garage at 6:07 a.m. The screen froze on the small figure. Grace, barefoot, in pink pajamas, loose slippers flapping at her heels, walked silently across the rain-soaked garage. No adult beside her, no glance back, just a child alone. Elizabeth clutched her chest, nearly collapsing, until an assistant caught her. Tears burned her eyes, but she bit them back, refusing to fall. She never walks alone. Never. At the edge of the room, Mike's heart split. He recognized that walk. Not panic, not random wandering. It was deliberate. Grace wasn't running away into chaos. She was heading somewhere safe. And he knew exactly where. Memory crashed over him. 3 years ago, during a therapy session, he had asked her, "If the world feels too scary, where would you go to feel safe?" Grace had paused, then drawn a picture, a wooden bench, beside an old castle in Central Park. He had written it down in her file and buried it in that box in Queens. Now the image burned clear. He was certain Grace was walking toward the one place no adult here would imagine. The officers debated. One insisted, children that age don't travel far. She has to be within a mile. Detective Harris shook his head. No, look at her posture. She's going somewhere she knows. Elizabeth's voice broke almost a scream. Then why are we still here? Go get her. The room erupted, keyboards clattering, radios buzzing. But amid the noise, Mike's eyes stayed locked on the frozen video frame. Grace's eyes haunted him. Not frightened, determined. She was searching for someone. He took a step forward. Stopped. His shoes were damp from the storm, but colder still was the fear inside him. If he spoke, his secret would unravel. But if he stayed silent, Grace would wander this city, alone, voiceless, searching. Behind him, Elizabeth's voice cracked in despair. She doesn't speak. She doesn't even tell me what scares her anymore. How do I know where she's gone? Mike closed his eyes. Then he spoke rough and low. The park, Central Park, the old wooden castle by the reservoir. The room fell still. All eyes turned to him, the invisible janitor. Elizabeth spun, shock and hope colliding in her face. Why? Why would you say that? Mike swallowed hard. Because children look for fairy tales when reality is too heavy. And that playground, it feels like one. Detective Harris studied him, then gave a sharp nod. Mobilize a team to Central Park. Now. In the rush that followed, Elizabeth pushed through and seized Mike's hand, gripping until it hurt. Her eyes were red, but within them, a spark of hope glimmered. Come with me. If she's there, she'll need you. Stunned, Mike hesitated. He was just a janitor, a fallen man. Yet in that moment, he had become the single thread tying mother to daughter. He wanted to refuse, but the trembling hand holding his left him no choice. Together, they pushed out into the remnants of rain. Sirens wailed as police cars tore through morning traffic. Manhattan roared awake, but inside the squad car, silence reigned. Elizabeth stared out the window, lips pressed tight, tears streaming unchecked. Mike kept his eyes on the road, ahead, past, and present, twisting into one unbearable knot. On the screen, left behind the video feed, froze on its final frame. Grace, small and fragile, her silhouette fading into the pale morning light as she stepped out of the garage. That image branded itself into every heart. A 6-year-old girl, mute and alone, leaving behind a tower of glass and steel to search for the only safe place she knew. And the audience is left breathless with the question, would she find Dr. Mike out there in the vast city, or would Manhattan swallow her voice forever? Chapter 6. The Bench in Central Park. Morning clung to Manhattan with a veil of mist. In Central Park, the trees were damp with dew droplets sliding from their leaves to the grass below. The air bit cold against the skin, a reminder that this city had never been kind to the weak. The police car screeched to a halt at the park's entrance. Elizabeth was the first to leap out, her heels sinking into wet earth. Mike followed, heart pounding so hard it echoed in his ears. The wail of sirens faded into the distance, leaving behind a strange hush. Only their footsteps crunched against the gravel, mingling with ragged breaths. Central Park stretched vast and maze-like, its winding paths cloaked in silver fog. Mike scanned the haze memory, guiding him past the lakeshore, over the small wooden bridge toward the playground with its weathered wooden castle. Yes, that was the place. And then through the curtain of mist, a small figure appeared. Grace. She sat curled on a stone bench, her pink slippers caked with mud, her legs dangling. Her black hair clung damp to her face, her old sketchbook trembling in her lap, the page open to the wind. Elizabeth cried out, her voice breaking Grace. She surged forward, but Mike caught her arm, gently pulling her back. "Wait, let me." Elizabeth froze, torn between a mother's instinct and a fragile trust in the invisible man before her. At last, she nodded, her voice cracked and pleading. "Please, bring her back." Mike stepped forward, each footfall, cautious as though treading on glass. His breath spilled into the cold air, clouding in the mist. His heartbeat thundered louder with every step. Grace lifted her gaze. Her dark eyes locked onto his, not fearful, not panicked, but knowing, as if she had been waiting for this moment. He lowered himself onto the far end of the bench, leaving space between them. His voice came low and gentle-spoken, as though to a memory. "Hey there, kiddo. Pretty cold morning for a walk." Grace stayed silent. Her small hand quivered as she lifted the page from her lap. The paper was crumpled, the pencil faded, but the image was clear. A man with kind eyes beside a little girl. Across the top, scrawled in shaky letters, Dr. Mike. Mike's throat closed. His vision blurred as tears pressed forward. "Grace," he whispered, his voice breaking. Her lips trembled. And then, like a miracle, they parted. The sound came rough, weak, but unmistakable. "Dr. Mike." Time stopped. Mike's tears spilled freely. Behind them, Elizabeth sobbed into her hands. The park itself seemed to freeze, holding its breath for those two words. After 8 long months of silence, Grace had spoken. Mike turned toward her, eyes red, but he didn't rush. He only opened his palm against the stone bench. Grace looked down, then slowly placed her tiny hand into his. The warmth of her fragile skin trembled against his, real and alive. He whispered, voice soft as wind, "I'm so sorry. I should have been there. I never stopped caring." Grace's eyes brightened with a fragile smile. Then with a raspy little voice, she spoke the words that shattered and remade Mike's world all at once. "I knew you'd come back." Elizabeth fell to her knees, wrapping her daughter in desperate arms, tears streaming like rain. Yet Grace's hand never left Mike's. On that cold stone bench, 3 hands held fast mother-daughter, and the man once invisible. A child had found her voice again. A mother had found her hope. And a broken man had found himself, and the audience feels the swell of release. After 8 months of silence, a single name had awakened 3 lives at once. Chapter 7. The Secret of 3 Years. The mist in the park slowly lifted, though the chill still clung heavy in the air. On the damp stone bench, 3 figures sat pressed together. Elizabeth clutching her daughter with trembling arms, Mike beside them, his hand still wrapped around Grace's tiny fingers. The echo of her fragile voice. Dr. Mike still hung in the silence, leaving behind not only wonder and release, but a low thrum of fear that no one dared name. Elizabeth dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, her hands unsteady. Her gaze swollen and red now burned with a fragile hope. She whispered, "Baby, you spoke. You finally spoke." But Grace didn't look at her. Her dark eyes remained fixed on Mike as though she was ready to give him a gift even greater than her first words. Her lips trembled, then parted. This time, her voice came clearer, stronger. "Tell her, Dr. Mike. Tell her about the bad man." The words fell like a stone into still water, shattering the fragile quiet. Elizabeth froze her grip on her daughter's shoulders, tightening. What bad man?" Mike bowed his head, eyes squeezed shut, every muscle rigid. He had always known this moment would come, but never imagined it would arrive so suddenly, so fiercely. Grace turned to her mother voice, trembling, yet steady, each word slicing the air. "Daddy, he was the bad man." Elizabeth recoiled, lips trembling. "Grace, no, you don't understand what you're saying." But Mike understood. His eyes opened red and wet. His voice rasped heavy with truth. "She understands, more than anyone ever gave her credit for." Raindrops from the leaves above slid onto Grace's sketchbook. She turned to a fresh page, her pencil scratching a shaky drawing, a simple room chair table window. Then 3 stick figures, a tall man with a twisted face, a small girl curled into herself, and another man standing between them. Grace whispered, as though reliving a nightmare. "He came into the room. He had a camera. He said he wanted pictures. Without my clothes. Dr. Mike said no. Dr. Mike told him to leave. But Daddy got angry. He broke things. He shouted terrible things. He said he would tell lies if Dr. Mike didn't let him do what he wanted." Elizabeth's mouth fell open. The blood drained from her face. Her trembling fingers brushed the page as though trying to erase the truth with touch alone. Mike's fists clenched. Memory crashed back Richard Morrison storming into the therapy room. Arrogance in his stride, calculation in his eyes. The threats. The crash of breaking glass. The camera hitting the floor. Every detail returned sharp enough to cut. His voice broke. "Your father staged everything. He made sure when others walked in, all they saw was wreckage and me. He planted the camera, the photos. Every shred was twisted." Elizabeth sobbed into her hands. The Iron Queen of Manhattan was reduced to nothing but a broken mother. Grace looked up at her, her voice small but fierce. "I stopped talking because Daddy said if I ever told the truth, he'd make sure Dr. Mike went to jail. He said you would be sad forever, and I'd never see you again. So I stayed quiet. I thought if I had no words, I couldn't tell the secret." Elizabeth pulled her daughter close, whispering through tears, "Oh my God. My baby, you carried this alone." Grace nodded. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but they gleamed with the relief of release. For the first time in 3 years, the terrible weight was gone. Mike turned to Elizabeth, his voice raw yet steady. "He destroyed my career, but worse. He broke your daughter's voice. And I thought it was my fault, that I had failed her. That's why I disappeared. Elizabeth raised her head. Her eyes were bloodshot, but a new fire sparked within them. Richard, he used my daughter's trauma to ruin you, to win custody, to control us both. The wind rushed through the trees, a low howl like justice long denied. Elizabeth rose, still holding Grace tight against her chest. Her voice broke, mingling grief with fury. All this time, I blame myself. I thought I wasn't enough. I hired therapists, tutors, doctors, but nothing worked. Because the truth was locked inside her, chained by his threats. Her tears fell, but she looked at Mike with unflinching eyes. And you carried the blame. You scrubbed floors while the world called you a monster. But in truth, you were the only one who protected her. Mike lowered his head, saying nothing. Yet behind his tears flickered a faint light. For the first time in 3 years, he wasn't alone with the burden. Grace slipped her small hand into her mother's and whispered, "Mommy, it wasn't his fault. Dr. Mike saved me. He stood in front of me when Daddy yelled. He told the bad man to leave. I remember." Those simple words fell with the force of thunder, tearing down the wall of lies Richard Morrison had built for 3 long years. The first light of dawn broke through the thinning mist, gilding the trees in gold. Elizabeth sank back onto the bench, pulling both her daughter and Mike into her arms. In that moment, there were no titles, no CEO, no janitor, no silent child. Only 3 souls scarred by the same man, now bound together by truth. Elizabeth's voice trembled, yet rang with resolve. No more silence. We will fight this. For her. For you. For all of us. Mike nodded, tears streaming down his face, but the faintest smile touched his lips. Grace, drained but free, rested her head against her mother's shoulder, her tiny hand still clutching Mike's, unwilling to let go. And the audience feels it deeply. Injustice has been dragged into the light. Truth has spoken, and a child has freed not only herself, but the 2 adults who had carried her pain for 3 lost years. Chapter 8. The Voice in the Evaluation Room. The court's consultation office sat on the 6th floor of an aging government building in Midtown. A single round light bulb hung from the ceiling, its yellow glow too dim to feel warm, too pale to feel cold. On the wall, a clock ticked each beat like a gavel, tapping into the silence, deepening the tension. Elizabeth sat close to her daughter, gripping the small hand in hers. Across the table, Mike no longer wore his janitor's uniform, but a plain shirt. His appearance was humble, yet his eyes had changed, steady, anxious, but resolute. For him, this wasn't just an evaluation. It was a trial of truth 3 years overdue. At the center, Dr. Sarah Collins, the court-appointed psychologist, adjusted her glasses. Her voice was soft, deliberate. "Good morning, Grace. My name is Dr. Collins. I'm here to listen. You don't have to be afraid. This is a safe space." Grace stayed still. She bit her lip, eyes lowered to the sketchbook before her. In the quiet, the scratch of pencil against paper filled the room. Elizabeth squeezed her daughter's hand gently, whispering, "It's okay, baby. You can." Mike leaned forward slightly, his voice low, warm, unhurried. "Remember what we talked about, Grace. When feelings feel too big, drawing helps. But today, maybe some words are ready too." Grace lifted her eyes to his. For the first time since Central Park, she gave a small nod. Her voice came fragile, raspy, but clear, every word breaking the chains she had carried too long. 3 years ago. Daddy came into Dr. Mike's office. He had a camera. He wanted to take pictures of me without my clothes. Elizabeth gasped, tears spilling, but Mike raised a hand signaling her to hold steady. He knew this moment must not be interrupted. Grace pressed on. Her little hands shook, but her voice grew firmer. Dr. Mike told him no. He stood in front of me. Daddy shouted. He broke things. He said he would lie about Dr. Mike if he didn't let him. Dr. Collins nodded slowly, taking careful notes. Then she looked up, her tone gentle. Grace, that was very brave. Can you tell me why you stopped speaking? Tears brimmed, but Grace sat taller, summoning all her courage. Because Daddy said, if I told Dr. Mike would go to jail forever, and Mommy would be sad. So I locked the words inside. For 3 years. Elizabeth bent forward, weeping into her sleeve. Mike watched Grace's eyes shining with awe. This small child had turned her terror into her greatest weapon, the truth. Dr. Collins turned to him. Dr. Thompson, from your professional view, how do you interpret Grace's mutism? Mike drew a deep breath. His voice was steady, though it trembled with feeling. Selective mutism, after trauma, is a shield. Grace wasn't refusing to speak. She was protecting both of us. Silence became her armor. But armor is heavy, and children cannot carry it forever. He glanced at Grace, his voice softening. The fact that she's speaking today, it's not just progress, it's freedom. She's choosing truth over fear. That's the strongest sign of healing I've ever seen. Dr. Collins studied him, then set her pen down. She leaned toward Grace, her words gentle but sure. You are very brave, Grace. Do you know that Grace smiled faintly fragile, yet brighter than the weak light above them? The evaluation stretched nearly an hour. Grace spoke more halting, but determined, tears breaking through, but never silencing her again. Each time her voice wavered, Mike's calm explanations filled the gaps, offering protection. Elizabeth sat in silence, her hand never leaving her daughter's, letting Grace lead her own story at last. When Dr. Collins finally closed the file, the room fell still. Her voice came firm, yet warm. I have heard many children, but today, I didn't just hear a child. I heard courage. Grace, you didn't only find your voice. You gave it back to your mother and to Dr. Mike. Elizabeth broke down, clutching Grace tightly. Mike turned his face aside, wiping a tear quickly. The door opened, and the hallway's light spilled in. Together, the three of them walked out Grace, holding both their hands. Her steps were small but steady, and in that instant, the drab corridor of the old courthouse seemed to glow. A child once mute for 3 years had turned fear into strength. A mother had reclaimed her faith. And a man once condemned to shadows had been seen again. And the audience feels it deeply. Not lawyers, not power, but the pure voice of a child had the strength to overturn an entire tragedy. Chapter 9. The Dinner of Rebirth. Night fell over Manhattan, like a velvet curtain shimmering with 1,000 lights. Towers rose like crystal spires, reflecting gold, white, and blue across a city that never slept. High above, in the quiet of a penthouse, the atmosphere had changed. No boardroom glare, no glass walls. Just soft amber light from glass lamps, faint jazz drifting from hidden speakers, and the aroma of home-cooked food filling the open kitchen. Elizabeth stood at the counter, clumsily slicing bread. She was a woman who had once commanded million-dollar contracts and presided over Michelin-star dinners. Yet here, her hands fumbled with knife and cutting board. Her hair hung loose, her face bare of perfect makeup, carrying only the weariness and gentleness of a mother. Mike sat at the dining table sleeves, rolled folding napkins, arranging plates. He still felt out of place, as though he didn't belong in this glittering world. But Grace's smile anchored him. The little girl darted back and forth, placing wildflowers from the balcony into a glass vase. Her voice, newly returned, spilled like music, eager to make up for 8 long months of silence. "Mommy put the flowers here. Dr. Mike sit next to me." "Please," Mike froze at the words, "Dr. Mike." Sweet and painful, all at once. But when he saw her beam, he could not refuse. He pulled out a chair beside her, letting Grace sit between them, the glowing center of a small universe reborn. The meal was simple chicken soup, toasted bread, a small salad. Red wine for Elizabeth and Mike, apple juice for Grace. Yet the air around the table felt sacred. For the first time in years, Elizabeth heard her daughter's laughter. For the first time in years, Mike sat at a table, not as an outsider, but as if he belonged. Grace lifted her spoon, eyes sparkling. "Mommy, can I tell a story tonight?" Elizabeth's smile trembled as she brushed back her daughter's hair. "Of course, baby. We'd love to hear it." Grace set down her spoon, inhaled deeply, as if ready for a grand performance. Her voice rang soft at first, then grew stronger. Once upon a time, there was a little princess. She had a beautiful voice, but one day she lost it. She gave it away because she wanted to protect someone she loved. Mike's fork stilled. Elizabeth squeezed her daughter's hand. The fairy tale was thinly veiled truth. Grace continued. The princess stayed quiet for a long time. She thought silence would keep everyone safe. But then, she met a kind doctor. He told her that feelings are like hiccups, they get stuck inside until someone surprises them away. She giggled softly, then turned her bright eyes toward Mike. And one day, the princess found her voice again. Because the doctor came back. Because she wasn't alone anymore. Elizabeth broke into tears, tears of joy this time. Mike felt his chest tighten, his throat burn. He didn't know whether to raise his glass or wipe his face, so he simply bowed his head, letting emotion spill freely. When Grace finished, she clapped her hands as if ending a performance. The kitchen filled with laughter. Elizabeth pulled her close, whispering, "That's the most beautiful story I've ever heard." Mike's voice rumbled warm and low. "And the bravest princess I've ever known." Grace tilted her head, eyes shimmering, and whispered words that pierced them both. But princesses need families, not castles. Elizabeth turned to Mike. In that moment, their eyes met, not CEO and janitor, not power and invisibility, but 2 broken souls who had found comfort in a child. The table no longer felt cold or opulent. It felt like home. The clink of spoons, Grace's laughter, Elizabeth's soft stories, all of it wrapped around Mike like warmth he thought he'd lost forever. As the meal drew to a close, Grace leaned against her mother's eyes, heavy with sleep. Elizabeth carried her to the sofa, tucking her in. Mike stood nearby, watching the little girl drift off, still clutching a page from her sketchbook, the princess who found her voice again. Elizabeth's whisper carried through the golden glow. "We're not broken anymore. We're starting again." Mike nodded gently, and in the warm light of that penthouse, the air breathed with something new. Not wealth, not power, but the fragile pulse of a home reborn. Chapter 10. The janitor steps into the light. Manhattan at night gleamed like a man-made galaxy. Millions of windows glowed, stretching to the horizon. Car horns, music, and bar chatter wove into a restless symphony. Yet beneath that sky of noise and neon, Mike's heart was unusually still. He stood on the wide sidewalk, having just left Elizabeth's penthouse. In his ears still lingered Grace's laughter, so pure it drowned out the city itself. A cool breeze tugged at his plain shirt, no longer the heavy uniform of a janitor. Mike tilted his head upward, amid the sea of electric light stars still pierced through. For the first time in 3 years, he let himself look at them without shame, without lowering his gaze. Once, his footsteps echoed through fluorescent hallways, unseen, unnoticed. People had passed him as if he were furniture. He had lived as a shadow. But now, in a little girl's eyes, he was Dr. Mike. In Elizabeth's eyes, he was the man who gave her daughter's voice back. He walked slowly down the avenue, memories rushing of nights spent mopping floors alone. Every stroke of the mop had felt like punishment, self-inflicted penance. Tonight he understood the punishment was over. He owed nothing more to the past. A neon billboard spilled its colors across the wet pavement, casting his reflection long and sharp. For the first time, he didn't look away. In that reflection, he saw not a janitor, but a man who had fallen and risen. From high above, a child's voice pierced the night. Dr. Mike. He turned. On the penthouse balcony, Grace's tiny silhouette waved her laughter, carrying down to the street. Elizabeth stood just behind her hand, on her daughter's shoulder, smiling. Mike lifted his hand and waved back. And in that moment, bathed in light and noise, he was no longer invisible. He was seen. He was called by name. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message lit the screen. Mr. Thompson, I will personally recommend the board review your license. Grace's testimony changes everything. Be ready. Dr. Collins. His fingers trembled as he read. A soft laugh escaped, tinged with salt, but full of hope. After 3 years of ruin, he had a chance to return not just to the title of doctor, but to the calling that had always defined him, helping children find their voices. Slipping the phone away, he drew in a deep breath. Cold air filled his lungs, but inside burned a quiet fire. He stopped in a small square, the city roaring around him. In his mind, only 2 sounds remained, Grace's laughter and Elizabeth's whisper. We're starting again. Mike closed his eyes, lifting his head to the night. The wind rushed past, carrying the scents of pizza from a street cart, gasoline from the traffic, and faint wildflowers from the park. All of it alive, all of it proof he still belonged. And in that moment, the audience sees it clearly. The invisible janitor is gone. Standing before them is Michael Thompson, a man who walked through the fire of lies and stepped back into the light through truth, love, and courage. Against a city glowing like a sea of stars, his silhouette no longer trembled. And somewhere above, a child's laughter rang on, promising that a new family had been born. From unseen to seen, from accused to trusted, from a broken janitor to a man restored. And the truth was clear. Sometimes it takes one child's brave voice to change an entire world. Night blazed across Manhattan, headlights streaming like endless ribbons. On the sidewalk below, 3 figures walked together. Elizabeth in a simple coat, Mike steady at her side, and Grace between them, swinging their hands as if she had just discovered the whole world. Reflections from the city windows shimmered across the wet pavement, casting their joined shadows as one. No more wealth and poverty, no more visible and invisible, just a family slowly taking shape, bound by love and truth. Elizabeth smiled at her daughter, listening to her chatter about fairy tales yet unwritten. Mike glanced up at the sky where stars pierced the city glow. For the first time, his heart was light, not burdened by guilt, but filled with hope. Grace's laughter echoed the purest sound in all of Manhattan. A child had found her voice, a mother had found her faith, and a man once unseen had stepped into the light. Truth can be buried, but once spoken, it has the power to save a life. Do you believe one word can save an entire life? Share your thoughts in the comments and rate this story from 0 to 10. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the next story that could touch your heart.